But if the Kings go to the play-in, do you think Mike Brown's on the hot seat? Like, how long do you think Brown's leash is? Because, I mean, this is definitely a disappointing season. I don't think it's a fireable offense yet, or at all. If they're, like, top 8. If they drop to, like, 13, I'm like, okay, this is an issue. I think you have to at least give them 3 years, regardless. But I feel like that third year is going to be a lot more... Like, if they can make the play-in this year, I think the third year for Brown will be more like, okay, like, this is a team that went from the third seed to a play-in team. Like, you better get him back to the third seed this year. I feel like it might put some pressure on Brown. Because, I mean, we talk a lot about Fox and Sabonis and the players. And we talk a lot about Brown, too. But, I mean, they dropped a lot in February and in January. And, like, we're in the 8th seed. I don't know. I feel like Brown's seat's getting a little hotter and hotter by the day. Not to the fire and offense this season, but I think like looking to next season, I think it's definitely gonna. All right, well, Brown only has one more year to figure it out. What do you think on the coaching situation?
Well, that last sentiment might be true regardless if he has a successful season or not. Whatever a successful season is this year, I think he has a lot of flexibility because he broke the playoff drought. And I think that's a huge deal. And I think that means something to Vivek Ranadive.
Okay.
The 3-year thing is pretty good, but I think he might even have a 4-year leash because you get the playoff year. This year, I think he has a ton of flexibility because they're really trying to... It seems like the organization top to bottom is under the understanding that they really wanted to boost that defense. And, you know, we've seen some kind of ups and downs from that and growing pains. Hopefully it's growing pains for their sake. But, you know, I think that this is a kind of a transitionary season when you think about it, despite the fact that there's so much continuity. So that's kind of interesting, and I think that lends him a lot of leash and a little bit of slack there. But we always say it about McNair, and it's the same with Brown. Probably to some degree is that the clock starts ticking. It's like you got to kick it into gear next year. Like next year is where you've made the playoffs. You've hopefully barring some miraculous fall or just a play-in elimination, you're going to have another playoff experience. Hopefully, you win a playoff series this year, and you're going to have all the better experience at that point. And then you can kind of make that next jump, maybe up the roster in the way that we've been talking about all season that's necessary. And then there's no excuses for Brown at that point. But if you're going to give Brown the roster that he has, where it's like your defensive pieces are kind of developmental projects like Kessler Edwards, Keon Ellis, guys like that, which are, who are 1 or 2 years away from making a rotational impact, if they are going to indeed develop into that, it's like, it's hard to kind of give him too much flack for this season. I think he's done a pretty decent job coaching. I think the things I would complain about are the letting Fox play on what seems to be a festering injury or one that's at least just nagging him. And he's had a couple of moments now where it's just like you can kind of sense some desperation from him, which I think is a bad sign from a leader. I think his blow up in Milwaukee to me still felt like desperation. And I can't remember what game it was, but there was another recent loss where he just kind of kept talking about the refs. He was very reserved and he wasn't angry or anything like that, but he kept talking about it. And it just kind of felt like an excuse. And it felt like he was kind of either copping out to the idea that he didn't want to chew out his team too much. Maybe he's treading around that lightly or some other reason. It just didn't seem like a good leadership move.
But it's a foul. And I don't, the foul that they called on Keegan, Booker was still going to get open. It was marginal. People hold at the end of games, and they call that foul because they say it's a foul, and they got to make the right call. But the foul by Devin Booker, I'm just so, I'm just emotional right now from the no call.
But other than those two things, really, and maybe I'm escaping another thing because he definitely hasn't been perfect this year. I think in the grand scheme of things, he's done a pretty good job and stayed the course for at least considering what the process is imagined to be,
Yeah, for me, I think I'm just like having trouble deciding if the switch to defense is still a good move or a bad move. Because it seems like they're playing away from the Kings' strengths, which was last year being a fast-paced team. I mean, just being very offensive-minded, not a very good defensive team. While I agree the Kings need to play better defense to actually make a real run at a championship in the future, the personnel wasn't there to do that this season. They didn't make any moves. Two, like the Juan Toscano-Anderson, was that really going to change anything? No moves at the deadline to really improve their defense. So I get it. He's laying the foundation to be a defensive team going forward, but like they don't have any personnel to do that. Keegan Murray's probably, benefited the most from it, but their offense just, like, at least last year they could shoot their way out of situations, but now the extra energy on defense. Their offense hasn't looked as good. Their shooting from three has looked really bad on certain nights. And, when they're shooting bad from three, they usually lose the game. I don't know. I'm still kind of just like, was this the right move this season to do that? Just because of who was on your team?
Just because you're still laying that foundation, I guess. It's because, like I said, I still think that this is kind of a transitionary year. I mean, I think they had to have expected something like this. Now, I don't know if they expected it to be like this, where it's like, oh man, that's really affecting our fast break points, because they're still near the bottom of the league in fast break points per game, right? And so that was a huge element of their game, their pace. And their pace isn't necessarily down this year too much, I don't believe. That's just off the top of my head. But still, you can see that there's not the same snappiness to their offense all the time. And yeah, I think they do just have to get personnel that's better, because teams have succeeded playing that way before. Teams that Brown was an assistant coach on, obviously, have done that. It's possible, but, it might be a little difficult when you're asking a guy like Kevin Huerter to go do as much as he can to push it to the limit on defense. And maybe that's just good enough, but now maybe that affects his offense. And maybe that's not an accurate way to put that, because to Herter's credit, he's shot really well over the last month plus. But in essence, that's kind of the nature of the team. And I think that's another thing that lends a lot of leash to Brown is, well, that's not Brown's fault if the personnel is not there. And that's under the context that he does have to start laying that groundwork. Because if you're looking at this as a 2, 3, 4 year process in terms of being a championship contender overall, you got to start as early as possible, and might as well be now.
Yeah.
But I feel like at that point, it kind of pivots to the GM.
It does. It does pivot to the GM. But at the same time, the coach in Mike Brown is in the spotlight. It's like, well, shouldn't he be playing to the team's strengths? Like, he doesn't have that personnel. Yeah. So it does go to it's on both of them, because McNair didn't bring in the personnel to get that good defense, and defense is needed to win championships. But Brown knows that he doesn't have that. So why is he still trying to do it?
Well, Brown came into the Kings organization in June of whatever year that was, 2 summers ago. And remember, he talked about like his 3 like big things. And one of them was like making the team like a defensive team and winning with defense, and noting the fact that like the 3 previous champions were all top 3 or top 5 defensively or something like that. And so like, to me, that indicates, especially with the fact that he has made it quite clear that the effort is to improve the defense. That's the main goal, essentially, is to really pivot to being a defensive team, a team that can really, as he said, rest your hat on it or lean on it. With that, and what he said when he first came in, it just seems like that's an organizational agreement and understanding that from top to bottom, that's the idea. And if that's the case, then, I mean, honestly, then I don't think either guy should be on the hot seat or even be close to that, because you need to just give them another year at this point. Because I see what they're doing. It's a process. But again, if you are going to go ahead and get mad at anybody, you get mad at the guy who maybe is biding his time in terms of getting the defensive assets. Maybe that's an argument to make. I just don't see how anything kind of goes to Brown. I just don't see how he's anywhere close to being on the hot seat.